Of course, Iowa fans, you know that there will be no spring game on Saturday, but there is a spring practice, I believe, at 10:45 Central Time. So we gear up for that as we do the discussion on Iowa football here each and every Tuesday at 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 where it counts, with Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm talking Iowa football here at Hawkeyes Live.
It's funny,
Corey.
right before we hopped on, Mark, you said you apologize for spreading misinformation, and I think you just spread more misinformation. So I believe the practice is at 9:45 Central Time. Let me confirm this before I accuse you any further. 9:45 a.m. So doors open, I believe, at 8:30. So an opportunity for fans to get in there. But yes, quit spreading misinformation, Mark. I want to say this, and I'm not apologizing for you, Mark, because when you're texting, I think that's sort of a unprofessional way of communicating. But as you and I both know, it's that's how we communicate, and I'm sure you communicate with everybody you work with. But Don Patterson is planning on being on the show next week. So if you saw that earlier today, he is planning on being here next week. We're going to talk special teams today. I know we got some news items to get to today. And yeah, it's going to be fun to have Don on here. Mark, for anybody who doesn't know, we've had Don on. We had Don on the entire season, but we've never had him on a show with both yourself and myself. And usually when Don's on, we're taking calls, and it's I love talking to callers. I mean, you know this, and I think you enjoy talking to callers throughout your week, but it is sort of nice. It's going to be nice to be able to talk to Don for an hour straight and just content, just straight substance. And I'm going to enjoy that next week. He is a savant of football and Iowa football, as you know. So I've got a lot of questions and just ideas I want to bounce off him. And certainly we can take questions in the chat as well. But I'm looking forward to that next Tuesday at 4:30.
Yes, I have often enjoyed and soaked up your conversations with Don, but this will be the first time I will have the pleasure of hearing from Don directly. And I will be able to ask my questions directly. That'll be a good time for me. You're accustomed to that, but this will be the first time. And Don's been an amazing addition to what we do here at the Voice of College Football, by extension, in regards to your working relationship with Don and bringing him over here to do post-game and other shows here at the Voice of College Football. It's been amazing.
It really has. I echo that, because a year ago at this time, and I don't know when you first, the idea of team channels and post-game shows first. I mean, you've had team channels for quite some time, but as far as post-game channels and expanding, I don't know when that idea was initially birthed, but I know when you and I had the conversation and just game planning, I could have never imagined having a better person and a better football mind. So yeah, he's been a blessing. It's been very enjoyable to have him on. And I tell you this, Don is a former quarterbacks coach, and I've said that so many different times on this show and on my show, Mark. So, that is what he specialized in. He was an offensive coordinator, and he coached every position on offense at some point. Besides, I don't think he ever coached the line, but maybe he did. I could be wrong, but he'll tell us next week. But he's a great resource for the problems that I was having, and that is primarily at the quarterback position.
Yes, and it was the quarterback position that we addressed last week. So if you've not seen last week's edition, thought we delved quite deep into not just quarterback play, but how it affects and impacts the rest of the offense, and made a number of comparisons across the Big Ten that I think are pretty meaningful and reasonable about what I was producing on offense and in the passing game at this point. So this practice that's coming up on Saturday is open to the public. And one of the reasons I know about it is, obviously, in addition to you letting us know, it's listed among the spring games. So there's a site that I access to keep myself abreast of all the spring games so I can figure out our schedule here. And that's what led me astray on the 10:45 time. But I was listed as, there's no distinction given to Iowa just having a practice. It is listed on a particular site as a spring game, but there's not going to be any coverage, correct?
Correct. Well, I mean, coverage from a perspective of the Big Ten Network, no. And I'm not aware of any.
No,
that's the
there's not.
That's the disappointing thing about
Yeah.
the way Iowa has it set up. And they used to go over to West Des Moines Valley, and do an open practice. That's no more. I don't remember if that was primarily because of COVID or the reason why that was discontinued. I know Iowa State, they were planning on, I think, 2 or 3 open practices. One at Gilbert, just north of us here in Ames. One down in Des Moines. I think they had to cancel the one in Des Moines. They're just doing one in Gilbert. But I mean, that's really good marketing on their part to. And I know Gilbert's basically Ames, anyways. But I think it's just a cool thing they're doing. I wish Iowa would do that, even if it meant going up to Cedar Rapids or going up to Unidome. Now, that may be costly. I don't know what the logistics behind that would be. But going over to Valley was a really cool thing, and I hope that that can be reinstated at some point. But yes, it's still an open practice. People will get a glimpse at the quarterbacks and get a glimpse at some of the younger guys. Xavier Wampa specifically. TJ Hall. I've heard good things about him and his performance. We've talked about the defensive backs. So it'll be a good way to cap off spring practice. And to me, Mark, the spring practice, and maybe it's because I've been a little bit less involved with, last year, because of COVID, I was able to be a part of most of those press conferences over Zoom, which I enjoyed immensely, and being able to actually interact and ask questions here and there to the coaches. And because they're back in person here in Ames, I'm not able to do that. But I've been a little bit less involved from that vantage point. But the spring has flown by, and we're going to be into summer conditioning soon. I don't know how long of a layoff the players kind of have after practice, but you hope that some major improvements have been made. I think, quarterback, we talk about the offensive line really is. I think there's more room for improvement on the offensive line than anywhere. I'm weighing both potential and performance last year. I as you know, Mark, I struggle with personnel at quarterback. I don't struggle with that at offensive line. So you hope that those guys can fulfill potential, and that maybe they've made some strides, and then they'll get bigger, stronger, faster this summer. So I do see this comment from Alan. I want to address it because it's one thing that I'm going to be producing some content here soon. I haven't done anything yet about Iowa losing out on Kyler Casper. Here's the deal. Nobody really expected Kyler to come here, at least for the last month or two. I remember, Mark, back in December when Iowa had that really solid signing day. I mean, exceptional signing day from Iowa standards. I remember saying, I feel pretty good about Caden Proctor, and I feel pretty good about Kyler Casper right now. And I still feel pretty good about Proctor, although that recruitment's been pretty quiet here of late. But as it relates to Kyler, it just, as time went on, and yeah, was it Nike specifically, the NIL poll of Nike? Maybe, but I don't think he was going to come here anyways. I think if Oregon didn't get him, I think it was Tennessee second and then Iowa third. He had offers to go basically anywhere he wanted. And Mark, let's just address the elephant in the bag, or what's the term? Elephant in the room. Why did I say in the bag? You can't fit an elephant in the bag.
Because you could be thinking bagmen. NIL.
Okay, that's true.
Bagmen?
That is true. Good point.
Okay.
Can't fit an elephant in a bag, though. Let's just address the elephant in the room, though. Why would you? And I've heard this from a lot of fans this past week. Why would you want to come here? This is not a snarky question. Why would you, if you're an elite wide receiver, want to come to Iowa, Mark? That's a fair question, isn't it?
Of course, it's a fair question. It is. Fans, and for some reason, there's been a number of topics and conversations that we've addressed in recent days on the main channel that has led me to come back to this same central point. Fans are fans, and it's great to be a fan. And there's a reason why we can run channels like this and be successful, because we appreciate all of your passion. But everybody's viewpoint is skewed as a fan, mine included. Now, I try to pull back and do the best I can and not to be, but we all have a skewed viewpoint on things. The point I'm making is that it's offensive for fans to hear that a particular type of player, position of player would not want to go to their school. But look at it reasonably. If you're a wide receiver and you can maybe not go wherever you want, but you've got a high selection of schools like a Kyle Casper does, why would you choose to go to Iowa? And again, take yourself out of the fan's role and put yourself in his position where he wants to flourish as a football player. And passing the football has not been even mediocre at Iowa for quite some time.
And Mark, I think what you just said hit the nail on the head. And you brought up the fact that you are a fan. You're an Ohio State fan. I think you and I are in very similar positions, because that is a question that I've had people ask, because they get upset about, opinions that we have or I have. And they say, well, aren't you a fan? What, don't you got to be a fan first? And that's exactly the opposite.
So we lost Corey. I think he'll recognize this in just a second, probably dump out and come right back in and join the conversation. So again, we're addressing the recruitment of Kyler Casper, legacy, Kevin Casper, wide receiver out of Gilbert, Arizona, here in the 22 class, 25th rated wide receiver, 3rd rated prospect out of the state of Arizona, top 150 player in the nation in the 247 Sports Composite. So a high level prospect as a top 150 player. And so he has made his decision to go to Oregon, and that's not even close to home. Lemansky says Cowherd, meaning Colin, I believe, stated USC turning over 50% of the roster for the upcoming season. And they probably need to. D-Rock Irish, good to see you. Lemansky and others. Erica, hey. Give us a go, Hawks. Good to see you, Erica. Please hit the like button, everyone. I'm sure Erica would tell you to do that, but to do it gently. Corey's back.
Here's the deal.
The show.
Let me just say this. Wi-Fi is completely gone. All right. It's completely out. You've had this happen before, Mark. There's no signal at all. All the devices just went down. That was not like it's struggling. So I'm connected to a hotspot. Thank you, US Cellular, for the hotspot. We'll see if this works, Mark. And we may have some problems here, but I'll monitor to see if we get I have not had any issues with the internet. So anyways, I will say this, and I think we were talking about Kyler Casper. Kyler, it's frustrating because you know how good Kevin Casper was here. I mean, in the late 90s, early 2000s, he was really, really good player. And it does. I mean, what you said about being an Ohio State fan, you hit a nail on the head, because I am a huge fan. I'm an Iowa fan. You're an Ohio State fan, but I was not ever going to start this project of producing Iowa content and podcasting and whatnot if I
So Corey's going to continue to tell us when he comes back.
Couldn't somewhat put my I don't think the powers that be want this sentence to come out of my mouth here, Mark. So just for the record, I'm back on my Wi-Fi now. The Wi-Fi is back. My hotspot went out. So apparently the world's coming to an end.
We'll give it a third try.
Yeah, let's give it a try, and then I'm going to give up. You are an Ohio State fan. I'm an Iowa fan. Okay, there's no question about it. But you get these people who say, well, why aren't you a fan? You're being way too critical. Why aren't you a fan first? I was never going to start this channel if I couldn't put my biases aside. And I guess what I'm saying is it sucks. I hate seeing Kyler Casper go to Oregon, knowing who his dad was, knowing how talented this kid is, knowing that a former Iowa player has a son who's this darn good. That's why it felt so good when Epi Epinesa, his son came to Iowa as a 4- or 5-star kid in AJ, and he was tremendous here and went on to the NFL. Mac Markway, his dad was not great here. I mean, he really didn't have the career I don't think that he wanted in the late 90s, but Mac Markway was a legacy recruit because of his dad. And, Matt, again, struggled with Iowa, but his son was a legacy recruit as a result of his alma mater. He ends up going to LSU. That sucks. So these last two decisions from two really good 4-star players, skill position players on offense, it blows. I mean, you hate seeing it, because you also look at the fact that this is an offense that desperately needs guys like this. But again, as an analyst, I have to look at the Iowa program like you just did, Mark, and say, can you really blame these kids? Why would Kyler Casper want to come here with struggling quarterback play, a run first offense that isn't real effective in any regard, and doesn't really have NIL opportunities? All of that, I mean, the NIL, Alan's exactly right. That's just kind of the nail in the coffin on some of these decisions. So it is a concern. And we just saw here in Ames, Tyrese Hunter, star freshman basketball player for Iowa State, entered the portal. Rumor has it he's headed to North Carolina or somewhere that can offer him larger NIL deals. Mark, we've talked about that issue. That is a problem moving forward. I'm not going to put the NIL, I'm not going to put that solely on NIL, Kyler's decision to go to Oregon. He did reclassify to 2022, which was interesting, but it is a factor. But it also comes down to style of play, and I think just productivity. And Iowa has no history under Kirk of putting wide receivers in the NFL. Nothing. There is nothing there, Mark, that we can lean back on. Marvin McNutt didn't make it in the NFL. DJK never made it in the NFL. Keenan Davis. You just go down the list. Cavante Martin, Manley. Some of Iowa's best receivers have not made it in the NFL. Now, maybe Amir Smith-Marset will end up being a decent player for Minnesota. Brandon Smith, maybe he'll fight his way into a starting role at some point. I question that, and certainly Keegan Johnson's got some potential. But 23 years, Mark, and that we just haven't seen that productivity in the draft. That's going to be a major play for these kids.
Two not so good indicators concerning this decision for me would be, number one, that he didn't go to a school that is decisively a better program than Iowa. I would put Iowa and Oregon in roughly the same tier of college football programs. So he didn't choose Clemson or Alabama over Iowa. So in terms of the total program, I put them roughly on the same tier, number one. Number two, he didn't choose to stay close to home. So he's traveling almost as far to go to Oregon as he would be going to Iowa. So he decided to leave home and still did not choose Iowa.
But what's a more exciting brand, Mark? Oregon football or Iowa football?
Yeah, to the national viewer, Iowa. Or, sorry, Oregon.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are a few schools that you would say are less exciting. Who's less exciting than Iowa? Maybe Northwestern right now. Maybe some of these bottom barrel programs but even Maryland is more exciting than, I mean, is that fair? They're more exciting. They might not be a better team, but for how they play is a more exciting brand of football.
That's an interesting poll right there to take, because I hear it all the time. When viewers or listeners or media guests from other fan bases just kind of generically pull what they would consider to be a boring brand, or I was one of the first names that roll off their tongue. Well, now that's not from me. That doesn't come from me, because I appreciate Big Ten football. I appreciate the Western Division. I think it's an excellent division and very intriguing. Actually, I think it's one of the more intriguing, interesting divisions in college football. But your Miami person, your SEC person, they're just thinking kind of Midwest, blah, don't throw the ball, don't score many points. They're grabbing for better or worse, or as a stereotype partially, but it's being played out in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much true. And I love Iowa, and style of play is what it is here. It's not going to change under Kirk. And I know Oregon, they're more run first, right, Mark? I mean, they're not a air raid, right? They're not going to throw the ball over the field, right?
Under Mario Cristobal, yes, run first.
So, it's not like Kyler went to an air raid offense because he wants the ball in his hands all 24/7. So it's not all style of play, but again, it's brand. It is an NIL, and you got to give the Oregon. There is such a thing as recruiting, Mark. Like these coaches are recruiting. And I'm not saying that Kirk failed at recruiting or Tyler Barnes and Brian Ferentz failed at recruiting Kyler, but they didn't get him. So it is what it is. You move on. Same with Mac Markway, who went to LSU.
Every so often we have a conversation in which one of us stops the other and says, I wish there was a metric that let us know A, B, or C. What you just mentioned concerning NIL would be the next one that I would like to see, and we're never going to see it for obvious reasons, but some type of salary distribution, NIL per team, the collection of Iowa players on the roster. How much money are they making per year from NIL versus every other team in the country? It would just be, and then to see if we could draw a conclusion. It's way too early in the process now, but draw a line from those figures to recruiting success.
And the reason why that'll never happen, Mark, is because why would the NCAA, why people aren't going to believe that the NCAA has any right to regulate something that they really have no say. I mean, the whole premise of NIL is it's none of your business what we go out and do as players. It's our image and likeness.
Those are private deals.
Yeah, you're not going to regulate how much we make, who we're going to make it from. That's the problem. That's the blessing and the curse, so to speak, for these players and for these universities right now.
It's a blessing for the players, and I think it's a detriment to the sport.
But it's also a curse to some players, Mark, because the players who
they mismanage it.
Oh, yeah, well, you're
talking about the ones that can't.
Exactly, and you have,
kind of money.
For instance, Tyrese Hunter. Here are names. His teammates expect to have him there and to be the face of the team and to be a leader, and now that team is hurt. So all those individual players are hurt by his departure, if it's due to NIL or not. So, it's not all. It's the grass is not always greener on the no pun intended, with money. But the point is that there are some serious problems with NIL right now, and I don't know. You alluded to it. I don't know when they're going to get fixed, if they're going to get fixed. Nobody should have any faith in what the NCAA does because they're reactionary with everything, and they're really not even reactionary. That's probably a bad word. They react when they absolutely have to. It's not like they react right away on things. They just finally, when they have no choice, but legally they're basically forced to make a change, then they may make a change. And so, it's a problem. It hasn't really reared its ugly head at Iowa yet, but now we're starting to maybe see some effects there with recruiting, and that's going to happen.
We're less than a year into this. It just became a part of college football July 1st of 21. Would it have been the worst thing in the world for someone, and I guess it would have had to be the NCAA because there's no other governing body, but some collection of people come together, maybe the conference commissioners come together and say, we can announce this. This will hopefully appease the athlete because they'll know it's coming soon, but give us a year to talk it through, look at the legalities, look at the possible pitfalls, look at how we could help the athlete, how we can educate them, how we can do all these things, and give us a year to figure it out and then roll it out with some type of, I'm all for the free marketplace, but there are restrictions and limitations and laws in place, and there should be with this as well. And I know that there are within each state, but I don't know why they couldn't have, with everything else, it seems like it takes forever to roll out anything that's far less complicated, like a playoff system. It takes 4 and 5 years to figure that out. But something like this that involves money and taxes and legalities and working with corporations and all that, just boom, July 1st, and
I know
it all breaks loose.
We've talked about the fact that, schedules are made 5-6 years in advance. I mean, it's just everything's upside down and backwards with college football, and they've got all these good examples to follow in pro sports, and they fail to do it. And it's such a, I mean, I believe the NCAA is one of the more corrupt organizations in the world. I really believe that. So anyways, I don't want to get off in a total rant about the NCAA, but I do think that, the Kyler Casper, Mac Markway losses, NIL is a factor. That's not going to change anytime soon. You got to deal with it. Iowa has said they're going to come up with a collective, which is, that's going to help. It's still not going to offset it, Mark. It's those types of things will not offset what other markets and private people can do. But I do want to address yesterday, Iowa starting cornerback or projected starting cornerback Jamari Harris was arrested. The news actually broke yesterday. It was from Sunday morning. He was pulled over for not having his lights on, according to the criminal complaint. He was obviously he was possessing some actions that would tell you that he'd been drinking. I'll just say that. I know I don't want to misquote the criminal complaint, but basically he smelled of alcohol and he was slurring his speech, etc. So he was taken in. His for the record, his BRAC was not a lot higher. It was not crazy out the roof. But you drink and drive, Mark, as you know, you're doing something stupid. I mean, you're taking a stupid risk. And not only you're risking legal ramifications, you're risking somebody else's life, possibly your own life, or whoever else is in the car with you. So it was a dumb mistake on Jamari Harris's part. He's not going to get kicked off the team for OWI. Okay. I did a video on this yesterday after the news broke. Or actually, I posted it today, but recorded yesterday because Jamari Harris, he's been this is his 4th year here. He's not a young guy anymore. Now, that doesn't mean you can't make a mistake at 21. That's not what I'm saying. But, you kind of perceive him as a young guy because last year was really his first choice, or his first chance. But this is his 4th year. I don't think he'll play this Saturday during the open practice. But a lot of people were kind of reactionary with their judgment on Jamari Harris. Well, he's going to be out for a game. Maybe he will be. Maybe he'll be out the game against South Dakota State. But it's interesting. I kind of ran through on my video earlier today, kind of the history of Kirk Ferentz and suspending players and disciplinary action. And yes, there have been players that have gotten OWIs in the summer or in the fall, and they get a 1-game suspension. But those are OWIs that take place in the summer and the fall. I'll give you a perfect example. Last year, you probably remember Iowa tight end Josiah Meeman was charged with interference with official acts. He was running from police. He was getting into a fight at the bar. I mean, it was just a total mess. PR nightmare, right? For your tight end. And he never missed a game. Now, he may not have played, but he was not formally suspended. He missed, I think, a week of spring practice. And he was back in spring practice. Now, that happened about the same time last year. He was April 13th, 2021. And so he was back on the field pretty quickly. And I'm not saying that, that Ferentz is not consistent, but not every situation is created equal. And who's to say that a suspension in the spring, for instance, this open practice Saturday, if he has to sit out and his parents are supposed to come in to see him, that is discipline. that's not, that stinks. So should he miss this week, including the open practice and a game? That's up for Kirk Ferentz to decide, but I wouldn't assume that it's going to be a 1-game absence for Jamari Harris just because of when this took place.
So I think we can all ask for the one word that you just mentioned, and that's consistency. Because when it comes to discipline, I don't have the perfect answer, and I don't believe anybody out there has the perfect answer for this act equals this discipline, and then everybody can agree on it, and that's exactly gospel truth of what should happen to this particular player who did X, Y, or Z, that it should equal this. But it's a 23-year program under Kirk Ferentz, and I believe that there should be a level of consistency, whatever that is. And you can always argue whether the timing of the incident should be related to the discipline, meaning if you do something in January, well, there's not going to be a game played for 9 months. So do you discipline them immediately and it does not affect the next season? Versus obviously if it's game week, then it's going to affect playing time. Or do you just say, regardless of at what point in the calendar you commit this type of behavior, you're going to miss a game?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I mean, you're sitting in a situation now with TJ Hall, who's going to get more playing time this Saturday in the open practice, or get more run. I know it's not a formal game. And Riley Moss, those two guys are going to get a lot of time. And if Terry Roberts is healthy, he'll play as well. I don't have a problem if he doesn't get suspended for a game, and it's got nothing to do with me dismissing the charge. But as you just alluded to, there's just so much time before game one. it doesn't, not everything's black and white that it has to be a game suspension. We as fans, some fans, that's all they care about, right? They just care about the game. They don't follow all the spring stuff, Mark. But there is more involved than just the 12 games in a year. So we'll see. It's unfortunate. I'm sure Jamari Harris is ashamed, and as he should be. But at the same time, you're not going to cancel him. You're not going to, dismiss him because he made a mistake. And you hope he learns from it. I have no doubt that he will. Brandon Snyder, really good safety at Iowa, who later transferred. He had an OWI. Amir Smith-Marset had an OWI. Tristan Wirfs had an OWI. Alaric Jackson got suspended for violation of team, rules. Guys make mistakes, especially when you're in college, right, Mark? Is that true? Did you ever make a mistake when you were at Kent State?
Making all sorts of mistakes every day. Not that I'm out driving while intoxicated, but yes, making mistakes. And the last two players that you mentioned, obviously, were able to overcome those challenges and correct their ways and are tremendous NFL players.
Absolutely. So, and I feel fine about it. I mean, it's unfortunate, but I will say this. I am anxious to see TJ Hall this weekend, and we can kind of transition into special teams now, Mark, if you want, because TJ Hall is not only going to get more run this Saturday at corner, but he's also going to get some run on special teams. It sounds like he's really done well in the return game. I think they're really comfortable right now with Charlie Jones returning punts. But Charlie Jones was good returning kicks, but I don't think there's any guarantee there that you have to run with Charlie returning kicks, especially when he's going to get more and more ride on offense as a receiver. He's going to get carries out of the backfield and whatnot. So TJ Hall has looked good in special teams. Sounds like Cooper DeJean. I know there's a lot made this past week when LeVar Woods, special teams coordinator, met with the media because he made a point of bringing up that Cooper DeJean might end up being Iowa's holder. Now, I want to talk about that for a second, Mark, because I had an interesting conversation with Don Patterson last night about this very subject, because I was just curious. Has there ever been a situation that you can remember of a defensive player being the placeholder? And he couldn't think of one. And he's not averse to this idea. But, Mark, it's a little bit odd to have a defensive back be your holder, right? It's a strange situation, right?
It's usually the punter or it's the backup quarterback.
Correct. So that'll be interesting. And, of course, everybody's assuming that means that LeVar and company they're planning on some trickeration this fall, which would be great because that worked a lot in 2017, 2018. They ran a lot of fakes. The polecat against Ohio. Well, you're Ohio State Buckeyes. You remember the polecat play that Tyler Kluber falls short of the goal line, but made the first down. It was a pretty cool play from Colton Rastetter, the punter. And they had a pass to I think it was AJ Epinesa against Michigan State in 2017. And they had a touchdown at Penn State in 2018 on a trick play. So they execute them really well. It's funny. You watch these plays and if you look back to 2007, 2018, I don't know why they ran a bunch of fakes those 2 years, but you watch these plays and it's like, man, that looks like a really low percentage play. And yet it worked. It worked out like every time. I don't remember a failed attempt. They had one at Penn State, and I'm trying to think of the big defensive lineman that caught it. And his name slips my mind, but a big defensive tackle. And I believe it was Colton Rastetter that threw a beautiful lob off of fake where he started right with some misdirection, threw it back left, and this big defensive tackle catches it over his shoulder in coverage for the touchdown. It's like, how does that work? But it did. So, if Cooper DeJean, who's going to have an opportunity to return kicks, he's going to have an opportunity to play on defense, whether that be at cash, safety, or at cornerback. If he's the holder, I think that'll probably, don't you think that'll leave some defensive coordinators and some head coaches up at night thinking about, potentially, and you don't normally say that. When have we ever said, Mark, that Iowa's game planning leaves opposing coaches up at night? I mean, it just doesn't, because coaches have been on the record, Mark, to say that Iowa is one of the most predictable schools. Now, they do everything very well. Typically, they do almost everything very well. That's what makes them hard to defend, but they're not unpredictable. But you get Cooper DeJean back there being the holder. That just, even if you don't run anything, that's gonna play some mind games, I think, on opposing teams.
And that's what makes the rash of special teams gadget plays ironic, is that the same head coach that is giving the thumbs up to run these gadget plays, these trick plays on special teams, won't open up the offense and get creative with the offense.
Isn't it an odd concept? Because that's exactly what I said back in 2017. They actually ran a play. And why I remember all this, don't ask me. I think it was actually 2018 at Minnesota. They lined up in the oddest formation, and Iowa fans will remember the play I'm talking about. They lined up maybe at the 5-yard line in the oddest formation you could imagine on 4th down, where they basically had the center lined up by himself, okay? And I don't know, you maybe had 2 guys to the left and then like 4 guys to the right, if I'm counting correctly. Something like that, and then had a couple guys in the backfield. But the snapper, and I'm trying to think who the snapper was, but he was a lefty, and he snapped the ball to his left with his left hand, shovel passed it to his left. TJ Hawkinson was the guy on the left side of that line, that segment on the right of the field, and he runs end around to the corner of the end zone for a touchdown. It's just the oddest thing. But when you see a Kirk Ferentz team do that, the fans love it, Mark. I love it. Because even if it's LeVar Woods, it tells you, hey, Kirk isn't as stuck in his mold as we once thought he was. The problem is they have abandoned that, Mark. That hasn't. I don't know the last time they've successfully ran. They haven't really even attempted. Maybe 2 in the past 3 seasons. Now maybe that's a little low, but I know this past year I don't remember a single play that was ran in special, and I don't know why that is. It might have been because Colton Rastetter, as the punter at the time, although he wasn't a great punter, he could throw the ball and do some different things. That might have been a factor. Tory Taylor. The thing with Tory Taylor, if you want to run Tory Taylor back there, he hadn't played American football for very long. When he got here, so you can have him throwing the football. I think that might be a factor. But if you get Cooper DeJean back there, my guess is that they've worked on some stuff this season. Because, Mark, as much as we've talked about the offense needing help and needing to improve, there's no question that the special teams unit can help. I mean, if you get to 4th down inside the 10, you either kick a field goal and you settle for 3, or you take a shot with your special teams unit getting a touchdown. That's the equivalent of an offensive play in the red zone. So it is exciting. I always tell people, don't read too much into the hype that the media puts out there with spring practice, because, Mark, you've been there. You used to cover college football from a different standpoint, and a lot of it's just hype, and we got to create headlines and we got to create attention. I know back when you were covering the beat, it's probably mostly, well, did you ever do sports writing for a newspaper, or were you strictly as a sportscaster on television?
No sports writing professionally. No.
But I mean, again, you if you're just constantly recapping, well, they ran this drill, they did this today, they did this. I mean, you got to actually find some, and the media does a good job of that, finding stories within the lines, so to speak. And so don't read too much into that. But the fact that they are running Cooper at placeholder is significant. The other battle on special teams, Mark, that's going to be worth following is the battle at kicker. Is it going to be Amaya? Is it going to be Blom? Is it going to be the new kid, Drew Stevens, who enrolled early as a walk-on? They've got some battling going on there at place kicker, and that's a very significant battle, Mark, because let's just reflect for a second on Iowa's recent history at that position. Marshall Kane. The first thing you think of when you think of Marshall Kane is a 57-yard field goal in 2015 to beat Pittsburgh inside Kinnick. Keith Duncan. How many game-winning kicks did he have, whether it be Michigan at home as the number 2 team in the country, final game of his career at Nebraska where he blows the kiss to the crowd. Miguel Racino's hit a game winner in the last game against Nebraska. I believe it was his senior year. Caleb Shudak was one of the best kickers in the country last year. I mean, they've just had an incredible run at that position. So assuming you have a drop-off, and I don't want to assume that, but let's just hypothetically assume that they have a drop-off, that's going to really hurt things, because kicking was a big part of why they were able to survive despite a subpar offense and win 10 games. All the kicks Caleb Shudak had last year, if you take a hit at that position, it's going to affect you immensely. So they need to figure out that position. I haven't heard of anybody specifically that's emerged. I know some people are really high on Drew Stevens, a young kid. Maybe he ends up being the guy. Had heard good things about Amaya. So we'll just have to wait and see. That will be an interesting battle as well, because that's easy to rate, on Saturday in spring practice. There is a forecast of 20 to 30 mile per hour winds during the day Saturday. So they'll be tested, and fans will be able to get kind of a gauge as to where those three guys are.
The real MVP is giving you, Corey, your periodic exhortation to go ahead and give us a mad rant. He enjoys those, and he believes that they are good for the brand, good for the channel. So feel free.
What am I mad about? I mean, what was that? Have I been mad today, Mark? I don't think I've been mad about anything.
I think you just referenced maybe ranting at another time.
Sure. No, I don't have anything to rant about today. I'm pretty, let's be honest, I think all Iowa fans should be almost just as happy with LeVar Woods as they are with Phil Parker. I mean, we've talked about the special teams unit, Mark. It's just rarely something that Iowa has to worry about anymore. They had a couple of years with struggling punters. Here's a storyline, Mark. The reason they need a new placeholder is because their most recent placeholder, Ryan Gersonde, who was I believe a 5-star punter. Iowa gives this kid a scholarship. And by the way, they very rarely give punters and kickers, long snappers, scholarships. They give this kid a scholarship out of high school, and he never, ever is the starting punter for Iowa. He was here for 5 years, Mark. He had him on scholarship for 5 years as a punter. He never played more than being a placeholder. So he is now gone. They need that position filled. But besides Gersonde and Rastetter that struggled at times, Dylan Kidd was a pretty good punter. Michael Sieb Dalton, the transfer from Arizona State, was a good punter. And I got Torrey Taylor. These last two guys have been Australian punters. You see kind of a trend going there across the country. And then again, the string at the kicker position. Now, they did struggle at long snapper at times last year. I remember there was a block kick against Northwestern because of a bad snap. There's such little margin for error, as you know, at long snapper, Mark. That's just you better be on target almost every snap. So we'll see what happens. But the bottom line is not much to worry about at that position. It'll be, if they don't figure out a better option in kick returning, like if Cooper DeJean isn't, or I keep saying DeJean, man alive, Cooper DeJean is not like spectacular returning kicks, or TJ Hall isn't spectacular. Another guy that I mentioned who's returning kicks in practice is Arlen Bruce. If none of those guys are off the charts, I'm sure they'll just stick with Charlie Jones. And Charlie has proven he can handle a decently large workload, because I still don't think he might be in the top two as it relates to receivers, with Keegan Johnson and maybe then Charlie, but you got Nico Reganey and Arlen Bruce there as well. He can handle a heavy workload, whether he be returning punts, kicks, catching footballs, or all of the above. So they have options. It's always good to have options. Kicker is by far the biggest question mark right now.
I am curious to get Don Patterson's perspective on this. I have a thought that special teams are not as important as they used to be for these reasons. One is that the punters' hang time is generally better than it used to be. Therefore, as you see, plus the teams returning the punt don't go for the block as much as they used to. So it used to be pretty standard that teams that are returning the ball would go for the block. But obviously the risk to reward situation there is not typically deemed worth it. So teams are not going for the block. What they're doing is they're peeling back, which allows the punter to, now you'll see the punter catch the ball and it'll kind of give it a look like, okay, is there a rush? No, there's not a rush. So I can take my time and really get into this kick. Therefore, it allows the coverage to get down there. Therefore, there are less returns. Number two, kickoffs. We all know what the rule changes have been there.
I think that needs to change, for the record, Mark. That's just a wasted procedure. Absolutely. That we have.
Because what happened, about 10 years ago was that I don't think it's been quite that long, but anyway, 7 or 8 years ago, they went from touchbacks going out to the 20, then to the 25, which deterred kickoff returners even more from returning the ball. And now, exponentially more than that, they make it a fair catch, and you can make a fair catch at the 2, the 13, the 8, wherever you want, and it's coming out to the 25-yard line.
What's the point of that? Is it to reduce injuries?
What is the point of that?
Is it injuries?
It's injuries, yes.
Okay, then why do we even have a kickoff? Why don't we just start from the 30 every?
It's tradition.
Well, but then let it be tradition. Let's not screw something up. Either have it or don't have it. I hate the fair catch rule is worse than the 25-yard rule. If you catch the ball outside the end zone, you should have to come out.
Absolutely.
And if you're afraid your guy's going to get injured, then play someone else. Don't have your best players back there.
Or down the ball and pay the consequences of downing the ball, fair catching the ball at the 12-yard line. That's where you get the ball.
Right.
I hate when there are rules that are put into play that go against the structure of the sport, because there's nothing within the sport of football that has been within the rule of play that would tell you that if on a kickoff, a player catches the ball, that it would just artificially be advanced to some determined spot on the field. That it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't, and let's remind everybody, if you don't get rid of it completely, you're still going to have catastrophic injuries. Let's bring up a perfect example. The kid from Maryland, Demas, last year against Iowa, breaks his leg on a special teams return with the rules instituted. So either take him away completely or don't. You're wasting practice time by having. Now, I don't know how much these coaches. I'm sure they practice it a lot less now. But I do think it's. I mean, look at Tim Dwight. I mean, the guy was a. Well, think about. Now his name's going to evade me. Steve Suter, Maryland. Can't believe I came up with that name. We had him on last year during Iowa Maryland week. And that guy never he never called for a fair catch. Literally never. So I think it's great for the sport. And I understand trying to limit injuries, but just everything that the NCAA does, I have suspicion towards. So it's because of injuries. I question everything with the NCAA anymore.
So my questions for Don Patterson are going to be, number one, has it been statistically proven that there are more injuries in special teams play, or is it just assumed that the more football we eliminate, the more hitting we eliminate, we're going to eliminate? And that makes sense.
Sure.
That doesn't mean we eliminate, we're going to eliminate first down now.
Yeah.
So
why not, though? I mean, if that's the line of reasoning, then let's just make the quarter shorter. Let's just make the game shorter. I'll tell you what, what doesn't help injuries? Having these long Fox timeouts. These long timeouts where guys are standing on the sideline every couple of minutes. That's what doesn't help injuries, because guys tense up, they get cold, and then they get hurt. So don't give me this baloney about you're doing this for the players when you have these players who are forced to sit for timeouts and then they get hurt. So, yeah.
So yes, my question number one for Don is whether there is an inordinate amount of injuries percentage-wise during special teams play. And number two, with what I just outlined, limiting the number of special teams plays, it would only make sense to me that special teams are less important in today's game than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah, I've had those conversations, but we can definitely ask him again. I'm trying to think if we've missed anything, Mark. I do want to touch on the advancement with and I know fans are not going to like hearing this, but this did come out in the news yesterday. The Cedar Rapids Gazette did a piece on it. There was a change with the Iowa football discrimination lawsuit. And I want to preface this before we kind of finish off the show with this conversation that, Mark, I don't feel that the lawsuit is necessarily the appropriate way of handling some of the issues that transpired. And I'm not trying to say that Iowa handled the situation correctly. I think we can both agree that it's likely these players are going to get paid out. This is never going to go to court. Iowa's going to be paying a lot of players quite a bit of money, whether you agree with that or not. So I'm just telling you what happened. So basically the headline, I'll just give you the headline now, and then I can kind of give you a couple quotes. And I'll just, again, this is the Cedar Rapids Gazette that reported this. And if anybody is interested in reading it, I encourage you to look this article up. So the headline, and again, I'm operating with one arm, so I apologize for the delay, but the headline from the Gazette: former Iowa Hawkeye players add linebackers coach to the discrimination lawsuit. That is Seth Wallace. You'll recall, Mark, we've talked about Seth. He's been widely acclaimed here at Iowa for his work on the defensive end or defensive side of things. specifically at linebackers, but a lot of people think he's going to be a really good coordinator someday. It had been alleged that he had bullied Mark Kallenberger's little brother, Jack Kallenberger, moving Jack to leave. Mark then leaves before his final year. And there was never a suspension for Seth Wallace. Of course, we know that Chris Doyle got fired for some of what he was accused of. We know Brian Ferentz never got a suspension, right? They handled those disciplinary actions, so to speak, in-house. But I want to give you a couple quotes here. This is one former Iowa receiver, Jonathan Parker, and this is, again, from the Cedar Rapids Gazette. So I want to give proper attribution here. But the new developments are as follows, as it relates to, one, retaliation. The new retaliation allegation accuses head coach Ferentz of intentional discrimination against Jonathan Parker, who joined the football program in 2013 after decommitting from another college. Parker, according to the lawsuit, grew weary from the harassment he and other black players regularly faced in the football program and shared concerns with the University of Iowa therapist. Jonathan was assured by the therapist that the sessions were confidential, according to the amended lawsuit. However, head coach Kirk Ferentz later approached Jonathan and asked how his therapy sessions were going. Caught off guard, Jonathan did not know how to respond and believed himself to be in trouble. And I'm not going to read all of this, but I'm going to skip down here. Brian Ferentz was accused of berating Parker using racist language. On one occasion in 2016, screaming at him, kicking a garbage can, and shouting, only a bleeping black player would do it that way, according to the suit. Quote, Kirk Ferentz watched the incident unfold from approximately 30 yards away, according to the lawsuit, noting Parker asked to meet with Kirk Ferentz about the comments a short time later. Despite acknowledging that he knew his son used bad and, quote, inappropriate language, Kirk Ferentz stood by his son's correction of Jonathan and advised Jonathan that he would not side with a player over a coach, according to the lawsuit. Kirk Ferentz then proceeded to steer the conversation to the topic of Jonathan's future in the program. Kirk Ferentz suggested Parker weigh his options for the next year. The lawsuit stated Parker transferred away from Iowa the next year. Now, that's not the only addition, but you see Brian Ferentz named again, and now Kirk Ferentz is, because remember, he was removed, and this lawsuit had been amended, and Kirk Ferentz had been removed from the lawsuit. There's more involved if you want to read that article on the Gazette website. I'm not saying it's right or the players are being honest or they're not being honest. I'm just telling you what's out there. And if that's true, Mark, can we just play hypothetical for a second? If Brian Ferentz, I have no problem saying this over there. If Brian Ferentz said that to a player, if he said that you'd have to be a bleeping black player to do something stupid like that, he needs to be, I'm going to try to think of the nicest way to put it. He needs to be terminated, okay? Immediately, if that happened. So I'm not saying it did or didn't. I'm not saying he should be terminated. But if it did happen, he needs to be terminated because that's racism, correct? I mean, I don't know how we argue that.
Sure it is.
And Brian Ferentz has been allowed to carry on in a tirade in 2017 in the press box against Minnesota at home, where he berated an official publicly in front of a bunch of media members. Okay, he's been allowed to carry on with this offense that has been, I don't even know what word to describe it, completely unproductive for years now. If this is true, not saying it is, he would need to be terminated. So we'll probably never know the answer, Mark, if it's true or not, because it's going to be settled outside of court. But it is out there now.
I always have a difficult time trying to determine, okay, what is fireable and what is not. The reason I would deem that fireable, because there's all sorts of misconduct that a coach can undertake, whether racial or otherwise, that is horrible leadership and horrible decision-making and way to treat any human. But that's just a situation where, if that did take place and that was the action taken, I believe that anyone up to some degree, there is a point at which somebody should be locked away. And I'm not talking about based on those, that conduct, but that everyone should be given second and third and fourth chances. But that needs to come at another institution.
And a big part of it too, Mark, is, again, I'm prefacing this by making sure everybody's aware. I'm saying if it occurred. We don't know that this did occur. This is a claim. This is an allegation, right? But this is not the first strike against Brian Ferentz if it did occur, because we just mentioned the incident in 2017 and his performance. So this would be the nail in the coffin, in my honest opinion, if it's true. Again, we'll never find out if it's true or not, but that's just, it is out there.
The flip side of what's horrible about these kind of situations is that when somebody, when there are allegations, that person who is accused of whatever the action is, their reputation is damaged to a certain degree, regardless of whether it's true or not. And certain people come to a conclusion prior to the legal system coming to a conclusion. That's another unfortunate aspect of these kind of situations.
It's the criminal justice system in this world that is faulty. It's never going to be, because you're dealing with human beings. And it's if those allegations, and let me just throw on the other side of it, those allegations are not true, I believe there should be repercussions for Jonathan Parker for making that claim, because of what you just said. It ruins Brian Ferentz's reputation. So it goes both ways, but they're serious allegations. I guess that's what we can summarize this whole segment in saying. These are serious allegations. If they're true or not, it is a problem, whether you want to dismiss it or not as an Iowa fan, because it's another lawsuit hanging over the university. You're going to have more money paid out. I mean, it's inevitable. It's inevitable that there's going to be more money paid out to certain people. And you've already had PR nightmares with the field hockey stuff, and you've had, Chris Doyle, they paid him over $1 million to leave. And you just go down the list, all these different lawsuits and things they've had to deal with outside of court. And, you can go back to the Rabdo scandal. You remember the Rabdo scandal, Mark, involving Chris Doyle? We'll have to talk about that another day. But, there's been a lot, and Iowa fans will know what I'm talking about when I use that word Rabdo. But there's just been a lot, and, it's another problem for Gary Barta as athletic director to sort through. It's just not going away. And, the other unfortunate thing about these lawsuits is that they carry on forever. They just drag on and on and on. Eventually they get settled, but it just is like a cloud looming over things until they do get settled. Because I'll recall, you will recall, Mark, it's been over a year and a half since this a lawsuit was initially announced, because it was announced the week of Game 1 in 2020. So October 19th or something like that. So, I mean, I don't even know how close we are. I would guess we're not close, because there's still amendments being made to the lawsuit, and so it is what it is. It's just unfortunate, regardless of who's telling the truth and who's lying. It's unfortunate, and it's just, you hope they can move past it, and you hope they're not true. You hope those allegations are not true, because as much as I've been critical of Brian Ferentz as a coach, I don't want to believe that those allegations are true. So I hope they're not, and we'll see what happens with the lawsuit moving forward.
We appreciate everybody being here at Hawkeyes Live here on the Voice of College Football every Tuesday, 4:30 Central Time, with Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm. You see his ID there on the banner, so please check out his work, Iowa football and basketball, on From the Hawkeye of the Storm. All right, Corey. On that note, unfortunately, we will move on into the spring practice that concludes spring practice in the spring sessions this Saturday, 9:45 a.m. Central Time there in Iowa City.
Yep, don't expect to see Jamari Harris there, but do expect to see Don Patterson here next week, 4:30 on Tuesday. And if you did miss my show that I released, was that late Sunday night, early Sunday morning, or Monday morning, tune over to From the Hawkeye of the Storm for an exclusive interview with incoming tight end Addison Ostringa, who I'm really high on. Very underrated kid. I think he was rated, last I checked, he was rated like the 1,100th best player in the country. And I think he's going to be a good tight end here. Really good athlete, really good pass catcher. So excited to see him on campus. Excellent interview. So check that out, From the Hawkeye of the Storm, here on YouTube.
Thank you so much, Corey. We'll see everybody back here next Tuesday. Or if you would like to dive into some Nebraska football, we are just about an hour and a half away from that, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 Central on the Nebraska channel.